Good morning, everyone. The attendees are still logging in. We'll give them just 30 seconds to get into the attendee room, and we'll kick off our program this morning. Thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Teresa Hatton. I'm the CEO here at the Massachusetts Association of Realtors, and thank you for joining us today as we approach our last week in our education series regarding fair housing for April Fair Housing Month. So today's webinar is about Landlords and HUD Section 8 voucher program. Today's presenter is Robert Sika. Mr. Sika has served with the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Office of Public Housing in the Boston office for over 30 years. He is presently the Director, Office of Public Housing in the Boston Hub after appointment in 2020. Previously, he serves as the Deputy Director since 2001. Immediately prior to his appointment as the Deputy Director, Mr. Sika was a public housing revitalization specialist, and his portfolio of PHAs included the Massachusetts Department of Housing and Community Development, the Boston Housing Authority, and the Cambridge Housing Authority, as well as many others. Prior to joining HUD, he was managing property in Connecticut and Western Mass. He's completed graduate work at the University of Maryland and Harvard University and completed his undergrad degree from Western New England College. Robert, thank you so much for being with us this morning, and please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Teresa, and thank you for the Massachusetts Association of Realtors for inviting us to this important topic for us, and hopefully it'll become an important topic for you as well. So I'm going to go over some of the fundamentals of the Housing Choice Voucher Program for this audience, with the hope that it might stimulate landlords or you in the realty world to think or consider as the Section 8 program or the voucher program or the Housing Choice Voucher Program, goes by many names, but it's fundamentally a voucher to assist needy families to rent units in the marketplace. Now, we all know that it's a tough market right now for anybody, for buyers, I guess, or buyers and or lessees out there that are looking for units. We are certainly familiar and aware of the tough market conditions that are out there right now. You know, at any point in time, depending on what geographic area we are in New England, and in particular the Metro Boston area, where the majority of people live in Massachusetts, a very tight market. When we're talking about rental vacancy rates around 2 or 3%, it makes competition for available units very difficult. So hopefully some of the stigmas or your lack of willingness to participate in the voucher program, maybe we can ease some of that anxiety through this. So that's my goal of this, is to introduce the program, the voucher program, the relationships in the voucher program, and to go over some of the roles and responsibilities. Hold on, I'm having trouble. Okay, so fundamentally, a housing choice voucher is a form of assistance for renters in the industry. It's a program that is run throughout the nation. You know, up to 2 million families participate in the voucher program on a national basis. So the voucher itself is a form of assistance for very low-income families, the elderly, disabled, and it's there to provide a family with the opportunity to rent a decent, safe, and sanitary unit in the market, wherever that unit might be. It's kind of the fundamental basis of housing choice voucher, right? That the family that has that voucher has the choice to move where they want with it. There are some initial restrictions, but fundamentally after a year, a family can use its voucher anywhere in the United States. They are administered locally by local public housing agencies. In Massachusetts, we have about 140 housing authorities that cities and towns that have housing authorities that administer our voucher program. And that voucher program, it's a direct subsidy to landlords on behalf of families to rent units. Eligible families can make up to 80% of median area income. And if you haven't realized or don't know, just last week, the income limits were published. I didn't take a look at the numbers yet, but historically they go up fractionally every year. They were published last week. Fundamentally, or statistics say that about 30% of the population that has a housing choice voucher is an elderly family, and that a family spends about over 8.5 years as a participant in the voucher program. So there is some stability there for families that have that voucher. There are some special categories for families that need a voucher: people facing homelessness, people with disabilities, youth aging out of foster care. It's a foster care initiative, foster youth to independence initiative. And of course, there are some special populations for special vouchers for veterans as well. Once that family, and so access to the voucher program at local housing authorities, again, those 140 housing authorities that I mentioned in Massachusetts, I want to qualify that a little bit, by the way. We know that there's over 240 cities and towns in Massachusetts. Not every housing authority, not every city or town has a housing authority. And certainly not every city and town that has access to HUD programs may not necessarily have a voucher program. There are certain forms of other rental assistance out there that are sponsored by the state of Massachusetts. I'm not going to get into those, but those certainly are avenues to get rental assistance. So a family gets a voucher issued by a housing authority through a waiting list. And the waiting list is tens of thousands of families long these days. And initially when that family is found eligible, and there's some basic and fundamental eligibility criteria that every voucher family has to have. Number one, they have to have Social Security numbers. They have to have citizenship or eligible immigration status. And they can't be convicted of certain crimes, methamphetamine use and production. And they have to have, obviously, the income threshold to qualify. Once that voucher is issued to a family, the term that voucher or that family has to find that unit is 60 days, and there are extensions in 30-day increments that can be extended by housing authorities. There are certain features of the voucher program that I mentioned earlier about this portability, about using a voucher anywhere in the nation. After the first year in Massachusetts, if you are a Massachusetts resident, had issued a voucher from a housing authority in Massachusetts, they have to use it in Massachusetts for the first year. After the first year, the portability feature of the voucher is then extended throughout the nation and their territories throughout the world, wherever the U.S. has an active participant jurisdiction. And so, as I mentioned earlier, it's tough right now in this industry because we have low vacancy rates and we have a lot of families that were issued vouchers that weren't able to use that. And I'm going to get into that a little bit. But suffice to say that there's a lot of families out there looking for units. So the portion of the rent is paid by the family in form of a total tenant payment. It's generally 30% of a family's monthly income or annual, whatever way you want to kind of slice it. it's 30% of that family's monthly income that is their portion of the rent. And the basis of that, of the amount of rent that that family gets, is based on the bedroom size of that voucher, depending on the characteristics of the resident. They might qualify for a 2-bedroom voucher, a 3-bedroom, or 4-bedroom, whatever is appropriate for that unit size, for that family's composition, is the voucher that they get from that housing authority. So fundamentally, the relationships are such as this. HUD at the top provides the funding to PHAs, public housing authorities. And through the public housing authorities, we look to the left of that diagram, the arrow going to the left is the voucher. The PHA provides the voucher to the family. And then, when that family finds a unit in the marketplace and establishes this relationship with a dwelling owner, kind of along that bottom line, when the family and the dwelling owner agree to lease terms, then simultaneously the housing authority will negotiate a rent to the owner in terms of a housing assistance payment contract, which is a contract that provides that the housing authority will pay that rental subsidy to that dwelling unit as long as there is a good active lease between the family and the dwelling owner. That's the fundamental nature of our program. We provide the funding to PHAs who then assist the family in these leases between and provide the housing assistance payment between the family and the owner. Here are other list of kind of responsibilities and roles between the tenant, the landlord, and the housing authority. I'm not going to get into each one of these. We're going to go over these in a little bit more detail in the next few slides, but it's a good summary here. So the roles and responsibilities: the tenant, the landlord, and the housing agency. Once that housing authority provides an eligible family a voucher and approves this family finding the unit and talks to the landlord and agrees to the lease terms, the housing assistance payment contract is then drawn up by the housing authority and executed by the housing authority and the landlord. And that means that everyone, the tenant, the landlord, and the public housing authority, has obligations and responsibilities under the voucher program. We're going to go through some of these right now. The tenant or the participant family has the role and responsibility to find the unit. Okay. Family goes out there in the market to try to find the unit that is within that payment standard range. They sign a lease with the landlord for at least 1 year, or whatever is common in that particular market. Like the Cape, it might be less than a year in some cases. The tenant may be required to pay a security deposit. HUD doesn't necessarily provide for resources for security deposits through our program. We know of other incentives that are out there in the market that housing authorities access through their own resources or other kind of community resources that they might be able to gather, community resources in the family to provide those other resources that might help with security deposits. During the term of the tenancy, obviously the family is expected to comply with the lease and the program requirements, pay its share of the rent, and maintain the unit in good condition, and notify the PHAs of any changes of income or family composition, which have the potential to either reduce or expand that family's eligibility for an appropriate bedroom size apartment. The landlord's roles and responsibility: provide the decent, safe, and sanitary housing to that tenant family at a reasonable rent, to maintain the dwelling unit up to HUD's housing quality standards. And HUD's housing quality standards are very minimal. And it's kind of the basis or the ground floor by which housing acceptability is determined. There are certain other state sanitary codes that are required that housing authorities have to follow as well. But for us, the fundamental nature is HUD's housing quality standards, and to provide the services agreed as part of the lease signed with the tenant throughout the course of the tenancy. So the housing authority's role and responsibilities administers the voucher program. That means it gets that voucher into the family's hands initially, provides the family with housing assistance that enables the family to seek suitable housing. That means the voucher amount. We're going to get into what that voucher amount is, housing authority by housing authority. To enter into a contract with the landlord to provide assistance payments on behalf of that family and enforce owner's obligations on their housing assistance payment contract. The PHAs have some responsibilities to make sure that landlords are maintaining units in decent, safe, and sound, not having a threatening environment, et cetera, et cetera. The fundamental things that every landlord, there should be no difference between a voucher family and any other tenancy, other than some contractual requirements. The housing authority, at least annually, has to reaffirm or re-examine a family's continued participation in the voucher program. So they have to do a recalculation or revalidation of a family's income annually. So that means the housing assistance payments in the tenant portion could change from time to, or at least, sometimes annually. And of course, the housing authority has to inspect the unit and to be compatible with our housing quality standards. So what's HUD's responsibility here? Well, HUD is the appropriator. HUD is the one that provides the money for those housing assistance payments to our housing authorities, who then provide the funding for those housing assistance payments on behalf of the families. Housing authority, or HUD, also provides housing authorities with administrative fees. They can't do it for free. We don't expect them to do it for free. HUD does pay an ongoing administrative fee for every unit that is under lease to the voucher family, trued up on a monthly basis. From time to time, HUD does some monitoring out in the field, correct rent payment calculations, proper inspection standards, etc. So from time to time, HUD does also get involved in this. So what is the value? I know this is sometimes a difficult concept to understand, but the value of the voucher is determined based on the existing fair market rents. Now, the existing fair market rents are generally set at 40% of the median rent in a particular area. So at 40% of median, the formula is there to capture decent and affordable housing units. On a scale, that scale is probably raising these days because of the shortage of units, but it's there to provide a value that would allow for families to rent modest units. We're not talking about luxury units, but modest units. HUD publishes the fair market rents annually, and there is a link at the end of this presentation. We'll share this presentation with you after. And when that fair market rent is then published, the housing authorities then sets the value of that voucher between 90 and 110% of the fair market rent of any particular bedroom size or unit size or unit characteristics. And that range, that 90 to 100% of the fair market rent, is what is the payment standard for that particular family. Now, we know and realize in Massachusetts, most housing authorities are operating at a rent level or a payment standard level that is about 110% of the fair market rent, just because of the difficult market that we have right now. That payment standard should be updated annually, and those rental assistance payments could change from year to year as a result. So let's take a brief example of what the value of a housing choice voucher is. Say the payment standard of a 2-bedroom apartment for that particular family is $2,000, and the household monthly adjusted income is $1,000. So if we take 30% of $1,000, so we have the $2,000 payment standard, 30% of that family's income is $300. And if you have a lease that has a $2,000 rent, then the payment or the housing assistance payment will be $1,700 directly to the landlord from a housing authority. So very fundamental depiction of what the value is. As you can see, there's a tenant portion, the payment standard, and then the HAP of $1,700, just in this example. So some of the benefits of the housing choice voucher tenancy: you'll get timely and dependable payments from the PHA. You will get your full rental payment every month that family is in a lease in your unit, and you're on of the landlord in good standing. You'll receive regular inspections to protect not only your property, but protect you against tenant damages when necessary. And it's kind of an independent inspection for you on an annual basis. You also, based on the terms of the HAP contract, you can request annual rent increases through the terms of the contract. Some of the myths of the voucher program: landlords can't charge housing choice voucher participants the same rent as their non-housing choice voucher tenants. Well, that's false. We would not expect a different rental amount for a housing choice voucher unit, a unit leased on the voucher program, than any other family. That is not assisted. Housing choice voucher tenants are problem tenants. I think this is a big myth. I think we would find that a majority of families that participate in our program are good tenants, and it's the income side that they're having some difficulties with. Another myth: it's almost impossible to evict a voucher family when they violate the lease. There are no different protections for a voucher family than any other tenant family that has an active lease with you. Another myth: if you accept one housing choice voucher program tenant, then all of your units must be rented to housing choice program tenants. And that, again, is false. It doesn't necessarily mean you must, you may, it's not that, once you rent to one participant family, every single unit that you have has to be rented to a voucher family. That's false. So this is a staggering number. This is as of November of 2021. That, as you can see, over time, since kind of right up to from the beginning of the pandemic to now, and this is as of November of 2021, the amount of voucher families in New England is approaching about 5,000 families out there looking for units. Unprecedented that there's this amount of families out there. It's one of the reasons that HUD is trying to incentivize, or at least offer as much information to landlords in the industry, as many practical tools to guide their decisions and whether to rent to voucher families or not. But it's a large number of families. In the Massachusetts portfolio, there's just about 2,000 families that are actively on the street with a voucher looking for a unit. It's a powerful number of families. At any point, it's sad when I say this, but 30 to 40% of those families will never be able to use it because that voucher when they get it, because they won't be able to find a unit that's affordable, or that the vacancy rates, they just can't compete in the market. So it's kind of sad, but I have to report that anything that we can do to get families into units, we would appreciate you as landlords to participate. So everything I've just talked about, I talked about in terms of a standard voucher. HUD has some other special purpose vouchers that go to special populations, and they're fairly intuitive here on this list. Non-elderly disabled families have a population of vouchers, or have it's a fairly small number of vouchers in that kind of category. We have a family unification program that is there to try to reunite families that have been broken up for various means, for various reasons. We have some veteran affairs supportive housing units, VASH, for veterans. We have some mainstream vouchers that is very similar to non-elderly disabled vouchers. It's for disabled folks, younger disabled folks. We also have a category, this is fairly new based on the pandemic, emergency housing vouchers, which I'm going to get into very briefly now. Emergency housing vouchers has provided 70,000 emergency vouchers to local PHAs to assist families who are homeless, at risk, attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking, or recently homeless, or have a high risk of housing instability. We do have a population of these 70,000 vouchers in our jurisdiction. And we've got about 1,600, or I'm sorry, 2,900 vouchers in this emergency housing voucher class. And you can see towards the bottom, we're having low utilization success right now. That is part of the population that is out there looking for units. The emergency housing voucher came out as a result of the pandemic. It's a short-term 3-year window to use this voucher. And there are emergency housing vouchers. They provide, there are some supports that are provided through our continuum of cares in the housing industry. So I wanted to share this video with a landlord who has found some success in the voucher program. Let me allow to play this and have a listen.
My favorite experience thus far with the HUD program is a family that I housed. They were a homeless veteran family. They had been experiencing homelessness quite a while during and before the pandemic, as a matter of fact. And of course, the pandemic compounded their pain and suffering. And this time, I was introduced to the family through one of the caseworkers and one of the program managers in the Austin HCB program. I got to meet the family, or rather, speak with the family, and I felt like I had a property that really fit their needs. They would benefit. They've been in there. They love it. They were just brought to tears when they moved in because they had such trouble finding stable housing. And I said, look, you're here as long as you need to be. I don't expect you to move into ever if you don't want to. So, and they won't. What was your experience with the initial inspection process?
And here's another landlord in New York about his experiences with the housing authority.
My experience working with the Housing Authority has been fantastic. They're extremely responsive. They're very patient. They answer all the questions that I have, and trust me, I have a lot of questions. But they're very, very patient. They're diligent, and they care about the tenants. They want to make sure the tenants are placed in a property that's safe and that feels like home to them. So the experience has been very, very positive.
How has your experience been interacting with PA?
So I wanted to share those last couple of videos with some positive, experiences that landlords have had with the housing authority, and some of the satisfaction that you have to, by helping some families that are in great need. So if you're interested in becoming a landlord in the voucher program, contact your local housing authority to list your available units. Again, there's about 140 housing authorities in Massachusetts. The resources that there's links at the end of this presentation that you'll be able to find a housing authority that runs our voucher program that might be closest to you if you're interested in listing your available units. You might want to review screening policies. I think, Teresa talked about Fair Housing Month and coming to a close of Fair Housing Month this month. The obligation that landlords in Massachusetts have not to discriminate against voucher holders because of the source of income. It doesn't mean you can't screen. You certainly should screen, but you shouldn't be treating anybody any different because they have a voucher program. If you're interested in maintaining a unit or maintaining your apartment compatible with housing quality standards, please get your hands on the HUD's housing quality standards checklist, like a 5 or a 6 page document that talks about the fundamental criteria that must be made in all kind of rental units in the voucher program. Engage your local housing authority. Perhaps they might have some project basing opportunities available, and this is a program that you would allow for say a landlord that has a 3-unit property, a 3-family property that wants to make all 3 of those units available for voucher holders in those units without that quality of the housing choice voucher being portable. That rental assistance then is kind of tied right to the units themselves. There's some limited opportunities out there, but we're going to start trying to encourage housing authorities to expand project basing of the tenant-based voucher program. So that's kind of an initiative we're going to be looking at into the future. Here are links to HUD resources. And again, I'll send this PowerPoint out to Teresa and Sabrina so they can share it with everybody who's on the call at this point. So that's kind of the end of my presentation at this point. I thought it would be best to have as much interaction as possible. So I am going to stop there and ask Teresa or Sabrina to help me out in moderating the rest of this presentation.
My pleasure, and thank you for that. We do have a number of questions in the chat. The first one is, can the voucher also be used to purchase a home?
Yes, there is a program called the Housing Choice Voucher Home Ownership Program. And it's public housing authorities are not required to offer a housing choice voucher home ownership program. And we have found, there are probably less than 24 housing authorities in Massachusetts that actually participate in the housing choice voucher home ownership program. I think that list is on the web as well. I don't have it like right next to me, but there is some opportunities for housing authorities to participate or allow families to participate in a voucher home ownership program.
Great. Question, we have 2 questions related to terms. The first is, what happens if the tenant doesn't pay their portion of the rent?
Okay. So what happens if the tenant doesn't pay their portion of the rent? That family is obviously subject to potential eviction, as is, just because their portion might be a fraction of what the entire rent is, that's still rent that's unpaid. And a landlord has every opportunity, as they would evict any other family, for non-payment. And I see the next part of that question is there recourse? Well, the recourse is through the courts. through the courts, right? And certainly if that family ever does get evicted, then that will be a mark on their future participation in the voucher program potentially.
Thank you. And then in terms of a 90-day notice to quit, would that be an acceptable term for somebody using a voucher?
The notice to quit terms must be articulated in the lease, right? So there's no federal guidelines here. This is state and or lease terms.
Wonderful. And you sort of answered this already, but I think it's a question that we get a lot. So just a nice, clear answer to this one. Is the voucher program mandatory for landlords in Massachusetts?
Yeah, I think mandatory might be the wrong word there, right? Hopefully, because of what I heard about kind of the exposure or idea of Fair Housing Month, right? When April was Fair Housing Month, we realized in Massachusetts that the form of income, that there's no discrimination based on form or source of income in Massachusetts. So if you're asking, if you have an apartment and you are considering a voucher holder for that apartment, you have to screen and allow them as you would any other family. It's not mandatory to use a voucher, but you can't discriminate against them because they have a voucher. So the word mandatory is kind of a tricky word there. Mandatory, if everything else equal, then yeah. You can't discriminate against a family with a voucher.
Right. If brokerages share their listings with housing authorities, apparently some housing authorities mentioned that they cannot charge a fee, and that's how brokers are compensated. Are you familiar with any housing authorities having such provisions?
Yes. Yeah, so I mentioned it during the presentation, and I don't have a comprehensive list, but I'm going to give you an example. In Maine, the state of Maine, there's been a realization that voucher families or families that have rental assistance in their hand are sometimes at a disadvantage when it comes to fees and security deposits, last month's rent, all of those things and fees that can add up prior to a tenancy, right? In the state of Maine, they have a program that they are allowing for landlords to receive incentives. Some call it a fee, some might not call it a fee. They're providing incentives to landlords that are in the voucher program. Right off the top, I think it's $500 or 1 month's rent for that new landlord who has never participated in the voucher program to have an incentive to come into the voucher program. And housing authorities in Maine through Maine State are providing or allowing families to access some of these monies that will allow them to pay some of these fees. I think there is some limited incentives in the Massachusetts portfolio. I'm just not familiar. Housing authorities aren't required to provide incentives. I'll call them incentives because that's exactly what paying a fee might be for that resident family. I just don't have a comprehensive list, but there are some continuums of care, some that are out there that voucher family or families with modest incomes can access some of these incentives or ways, but as a general statement, HUD does not pay them. I know it was a long-winded way to say HUD doesn't pay them, but there could be some opportunities for folks to access those kind of resources.
Thank you. We have another one. Is it possible to rent a single family unit to a relative who has a voucher?
Yes, but there's some qualifications. So, first of all, generally speaking, it's not allowed. Or family, immediate family members cannot generally lease to participant families. Single unit, doesn't matter if it's a single family home, townhome, condominium, generally no, unless that voucher participant family is elderly and or disabled. So there's some exceptions to renting from family members for elderly families and families that are disabled, that have disabled families.
Thank you. We have a comment. Several of my voucher clients have credit issues and their apartment applications have been denied. Do you have any suggestions about what to do to overcome these obstacles?
Yeah, I think that's, I don't, I really don't. I mean, yeah, fixing credit, right? I mean, getting into some kind of an action that fixes your credit. But, I just don't have any, perhaps, and this is just a perhaps, I'm not saying HUD should or would require this, but I mentioned this, take a look at your standards for screening. Maybe they might be lowered a little bit. Maybe a credit score of 600 shouldn't be the threshold. Maybe it should be 550. Whatever that number is.
Okay. Yes, you will receive a copy of this PowerPoint in your email. And is there a place where we can get the list of Massachusetts communities that participate in the voucher home ownership program?
I will try to find that, but I would suggest do the search on the web first. It might be hiding somewhere where I don't know of it yet. It's not a program that we pay a lot. We know it's out there. We know it's available, but certainly it's a very small percentage of voucher holders that participate in that program. Very
Excellent.
specialized.
If we receive that from you, we will indeed share it with our members and put it on our website as well. Is there a cap on annual rent increases? For example, if rent was $1,000, can it increase by $400 if there were no annual increases made by the landlord in years? So they are way below fair market rent.
You can ask for a rent increase whatever you want. Whether it's going to be granted is a different thing, and whether it's in that payment standard range that allows for that failure. It's kind of it's a bit of a little hidden secret that's not well published out there. But if you kind of remember the formula that I used, that 30% of a family's income is kind of their portion of the rent. A family can actually pay up to 40% of their monthly income for their portion of the rent. So, if you're kind of capped at this payment standard, it's 110% of the fair market rent, and that's your new contract rent or potential new contract rent. You can actually ask for a little bit more than that, and that would require the tenant family to pay a little bit more than 30%. So that tenant family can pay up to 40%. That's a way to kind of get a little bit more than the fair market rent. It's easier to illustrate than it is to describe.
Another question related to eviction process. If during the eviction process, as it's happening, will HUD continue to pay the voucher portion of the rent if the tenant hasn't paid their portion?
Generally, yes. The housing authority will continue until there's a formal eviction. But fees, I'm not sure. No, not fees.
Okay, great. Sorry, this is a long one. The comment by someone that some housing authorities require the tenant to sign off on the rent increases. Some tenants do not want to do this, and the owner's stuck. Well, the tenant could move.
So, okay, I'm rereading it here again.
Right.
Some housing authorities require the tenant to sign off on the rent increase. Some tenants do not want to do this. So the rent increase is kind of quote unquote approved by a housing authority. And it becomes kind of an automatic amendment to an ongoing lease, essentially, or that ongoing housing assistance payment contract, I should say, not the lease itself. But, you know, just like a family's portion changes from time to time, the landlord's portion would change from time to time as well. But I don't think it's necessary that you get a tenant family's sign off. I mean, they are assigned a portion of the rent, right, annually. You know, whether that's in terms of a formal amendment to the HAP contract, it certainly is an amendment to the HAP contract, but the lease, it should go simultaneous with that. I'm not sure why a family wouldn't want to do this.
And then the next question, if a landlord sells their property and the prospective purchaser refuses to assume any of the leases, not based on any sort of discriminatory intent, does the holder of a Section 8 voucher have any additional protections?
No additional protections.
Great. And any other last questions? We appreciate your participation today. I also want to encourage all of you to visit mass.realtor, mass.realtor. That is a site we have put up to help tenants and landlords understand some of these programs that we reviewed this morning. And it's in 3 different languages as well. So if you have clients that speak Spanish or Portuguese, it's translated to those languages as well. Okay, Robert, I can't thank you enough for spending your Monday morning with us and educating us on these really important programs. The numbers across the state are just astounding, and we know that there's not enough housing for purchase or for rent. So let's all work together to see what we can do to get everybody into a safe home.
Well, thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, Robert.
All right. Bye.